We just passed some very interesting legislation over the past days, looking at background checks in particular. And, I understand there's some concerns. I'm wondering if you could tell us about that.
Well, the first one that passed out was HR-8. They called it the Bipartisan Universal Background Checks Act of 2019. The bipartisan thing is, well, we could argue about that at another time. But the idea was that this is a piece of legislation that was supposed to make us safer. And the only problem with that is the fact that in order to make that work, they would have to have the bad guys actually try to buy a gun in a place that requires a background check. And we know that that doesn't happen. The Bureau of Justice Statistics, they put out studies every couple of years where they ask the people arrested for gun crimes, where did you get your guns? And the overwhelming majority of them says we steal them, we get them on the black market and all of that. So what you're doing right now is you're requiring good, honest, law-abiding people who are following the law to go through this background check when they want to sell to their friends, to their neighbors, to their cousins or their stepfathers or whatever it might be. And it's making it more difficult for those people to actually exercise their Second Amendment rights.
Right. And there's, this isn't the only legislation. There's actually some more stringent restrictions that are happening. Is that right? Yeah.
Right, yeah. There was 1112 that passed the other day. And with this bill, it takes, right now, whenever you go into a gun dealer and you apply for the background check, they have 3 days to complete it. Well, this bill makes it so it's 10 days to complete it. The thing you have to remember is we're talking those are 10 business days. And if it's not done then, they can still deny you. Then you have to make an appeal to the FBI, and that takes another 10 days. Now, that might not sound like all that much, but those 10 business days eat up a whole lot of time. And if there's a holiday or the government is closed or something else happens where they can't access the records, that actually goes on 30 full calendar days. And your background check is only valid for 30 calendar days. So you get caught in this loop where you're going to apply and you're going to get denied just because the thing has run out of time. It's ridiculous.
Do you think that's intentional?
I think that for some it could be intentional, and for some I think it's the fact that the people who write these laws that are trying to restrict your rights actually don't understand what people are trying to do when they're exercising these rights. When people are writing laws about a magazine capacity or about it's an assault weapon if it has a collapsible stock, it's because they don't understand firearms, they don't understand how they act and react, and they just decide that they're going to make up the rules off the top of their head.
See, for many people, especially let's say people in the big cities, and that's definitely a good part of our audience, for them a background check is a no-brainer. Like, of course you would want a background check before someone can get a firearm. Like, isn't that reasonable? Maybe you can kind of break that down a little bit from the NRA perspective.
Well, for instance, we had a woman that came in to testify, not to testify, but spoke out in front of Congress the other day, right, with Congressman Hudson and Congressman Solis and all of those. Yeah. Now, she comes from a place called Rosedale, Indiana.
Okay.
It's population 750.
Okay.
And as she likes to say, she doesn't live in town, she lives on the outskirts of town.
I see.
Now, for somebody like her, somebody who lives on the outskirts of town, you've got to go find, if for the HR-8, what we're talking about, for somebody like her, the first thing you have to do, if you're going to loan your gun to somebody, you've got somebody that you work with whose boyfriend is getting out of jail because he was abusive to you. Well, maybe she'd like protection, so you want to loan her your firearm. You've got to go find a federally licensed firearms dealer to run that background check. Usually there's not one right around the corner. It's difficult to find one here in DC.
You go to the big city or something.
Yeah, so you've got to drive, what, 20 miles, 30 miles, an hour, 2 hours? When you get there, they can charge whatever they like to run the background check. Here in Washington, D.C., I've heard that they charge as much as $150. So I've got to pay $150, drive 2 hours so I can loan this person the gun so they can protect themselves. And after the threat has passed, we got to drive those 2 hours again, go back to the dealer, and run a background check so they can return it to me. So they're making it more difficult there. Or even if they're, my neighbor George, he wants to go hunting with his boys for the weekend, who just came in from out of town. George only has his one shotgun, so he's coming over to borrow mine. And they're going to go off on this big hunting trip. Same deal. You've got to find a dealer, you've got to pay the fee, and I've got to pass a background check when George returns my gun. It's ridiculous. And again, it goes back to the point that when you're talking about the bad guys and how they get their guns,
yeah, they're not.
They do it by breaking the law. This is only going to affect the people who are following the law to begin with.
But what about the people that have the mental illness? I think that's probably the main case that's being argued for the background checks. Like maybe it's an American, they don't necessarily have a history of criminal activity, maybe they haven't been a criminal, but there's this mental instability, maybe they've been institutionalized. We probably don't want to have firearms in their hands, right?
Well, again, it is against the law to sell a firearm to anybody, no matter if you're a gun dealer or if you're a private citizen, if you think that they're not legally allowed to possess them, if you think somebody's a felon, if you think somebody's suffering from a mental illness or something like that, it's already against the law. So you don't have to go through with that. They're putting up these possibilities and examples of these wide-eyed examples of what could happen and what has happened. But the main thing is when you look back at all of the high-profile shootings of the stuff that's come through, everybody has gone through and passed a background check, or this wouldn't have stopped them to begin with. It is not something that actually makes a difference. As a matter of fact, you look at California, they've had their universal background check system in since the 90s.
Okay.
And they had some of the best gun researchers in the industry, from UC Davis and from the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public something or other. I forget exactly what it is.
Sure.
But so they went through and they looked at it, and they found that California's universal background check system had no impact whatsoever when it comes to gun deaths. Now, if you're talking about a place like California, where they really put it to the law-abiding gun owners, and it's not making a difference out there, then how would they expect it to make a difference anywhere else? Yeah.
Fascinating perspectives. Lars, thank you so much for joining us.
I appreciate you having me on.